Welcome to Women of the World Endowment's third conversation in our Changemakers series. I'm Kiva, a managing director here at WoWE. The Changemakers series is designed to explore with leaders from across our ecosystem how the capital markets can fully invest in and through women as drivers of innovative solutions to today's most pressing environmental and social challenges. Today, it is my honor to have you engage with our MIT MBA and Masters of Finance graduate interns, Emma, Saumya, and Megan. They've spent this spring term exploring WoWE's theory of change, the nexus of gender parity and prevailing sustainability and racial and social themes. WoWE's theory of change rests on this thesis of women as change makers, solving issues that impact our communities, businesses, and our global economy across 5 dimensions of gender parity: women in leadership, women in finance, companies treating female employees well, improving women's lives, and products and services that improves women's lives as well. All at the intersection of sustainability themes such as climate, women's safety, healthcare, and inclusion, and at the intersection of racial equity themes, as you can see here from the slide. Emma, Saumya, and Megan dug deep into data around the areas of gender plus education, climate, healthcare, and economic opportunity. Today, they will share some of those riveting statistics uncovered, as well as what the world would be if capital was appropriately allocated to solve for the issues that this data highlights. Please take a moment to introduce yourselves in the chat, and also feel free to ask questions along the way via the chat. We will open up for reactions and questions during our conversation. We are recording this first portion of the conversation and we'll close off for audience discussion. We will share this video after the session. Now I will turn it over to Emma, Saumya, and Megan to introduce themselves. The first to speak will be Emma. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. As Kiva mentioned, I am Emma, an MBA student at MIT. I come from a background of management consulting and studied race, gender, and systems of inequality in my undergraduate degree.
Log into a webinar.
Sorry, I think that there might be a little bit of chat happening as well. But I'm very excited to be with you all today. I did research on education, which is a passion of mine in my volunteer work, and look forward to sharing. I'll pass it to Saumya to introduce herself quickly as well.
Hi everyone, I'm Saumya. I am a Master's of Finance student at MIT Sloan. I am focusing on financial engineering, and prior to this, I have a background in chemical engineering as my bachelor's degree, and for my internships in my undergrad, I worked in the consumer goods industry, which really sparked my interest in sustainability and the environment, which is one of my 2 topics today that we'll be discussing. I'm very excited to be here and show you guys what I've learned.
And hi, everyone. Really nice to be here with you today. My name is Megan Krishnamurthy, and I'm also an MBA student at MIT Sloan, specifically focusing on entrepreneurship and innovation. I'm also a co-founder at Beatrix, which is a data-driven investment platform that connects female founders with angel investors. Prior to MIT Sloan, I worked at JPMorgan Chase for 5 years, first in hedge fund sales and later in corporate responsibility. I focused my research on economic opportunity, and like Emma and Saumya said, I'm really excited to share with you what I found today. So with that, I'll hand it over to Emma to start talking a little bit about the intersection of education and gender.
Okay, perfect. Again, we're so happy to be with you all today. We wanted to start off actually with a poll for you all, just to get the juices flowing, us starting to think about things. So our poll question is, how much can a woman's earnings increase with just 1 additional year of schooling? And feel free to rate in the poll, and then I will reveal the answer. Okay. Interesting. It looks like we have a lot of concentration in that 5% to 10% range. Okay, I think we have almost everyone there. So the answer is actually 10%. With just one additional year of education, a woman's earnings could increase by 10 to even 20%. And we really love to imagine just what that 10 to 20% could change in terms of power dynamics for women and how it could be further invested into communities. For example, as my colleague Saumya will discuss later, female leaders tend to invest more in climate. So imagine what this 10 to 20% can do, even as we extend to climate. By investing in women's education, WoWE can have an impact on whole communities and further goals across other verticals. So now I'm going to take a step back from our poll and just explain a little bit more of the research that I did. So the focus of my research was the intersection of women and education. We thought about this in two distinct buckets. So one being, women having education, and one being women as change makers within education. So you can think of this as looking at the impacts of girls in schools and the impact of female teachers or principals on their students. So I really dove into a few aspects, kind of touching on financial power, student outcomes, and the environment. So I'll start with the economic impacts. And this is something that, again, is going to really relate to the research that Megan did as well. So when I looked at the economic impacts of women in education, again, we looked at both the education of girls and women as educators. So in terms of educating women, we found that if 1% more girls complete secondary education, economies will grow by 0.3%, which can have big impacts on life within developing economies, especially. As we mentioned earlier, 10 to 20% could be the increase in a woman's earnings if they get just one additional year of school, which again has those economic impacts. Then when I looked at women as educators, we were really struck first by the pay gap between male and female teachers. So while 66% of the world's primary education teachers are women, they do not necessarily earn the same as their male counterparts. They face a lot of barriers in terms of moving up the ladder as well. So if male and female teachers were paid the same, female teachers could stand to increase their income by about 3 to 8%, depending on the level at which they're able to rise within an organization. Next, I want to take you through a little bit this diagram that we have on the left-hand side, which really looks at, how having women as change makers within education can really impact our world. Based on a study done in Spanish secondary schools, we saw that female principals were associated with a 6% improvement in student test scores, which was corroborated by studies done around the world. We then dug a little bit further into, okay, what is the impact that this has actually on those girls as well? And we found that girls, when they have female teachers, see an improvement of their test scores by 2 to 3% overall. So not only can we see an impact on all students, but our girls especially are impacted by having female teachers. Even further, STEM teachers have an even bigger impact. So female students with female STEM teachers are 6 to 15% more likely to pursue STEM degrees or careers based on studies that we've seen around the world. Having better educated girls has a huge impact on the quality of life for women in their communities. Each year of secondary education reduces the likelihood of marrying as a child before the age of 18 by 5%. Universal secondary education could virtually end child marriage. If all women had a secondary education, early births could also fall by 59%. Additionally, better educated women are able to protect themselves and their families in times of disaster. So deaths due to disaster could be reduced by 60% by 2050 if 70% of all 20 to 39-year-old women completed lower secondary school. And this cycle we saw continues. So each additional year of school a mother attends leads to her children completing 4 more months of school by the age of 15 to 18. So we see this continuing. The more women that we have as educators, the more girls we have going to school, and the eventual impacts on education is this virtuous cycle. So the impact on investing in women in education is very clear, and it stretches to impacts in other areas like the economy and the environment. The question that we will hopefully get to in the discussion period is where an organization like WoWE can really deploy their capital to kind of fuel this system. So now I'm going to send it over to Saumya to talk about the next vertical.
Thank you, Emma. I think a lot of our guests here will see the connection between our education and climate section. So I'm going to kick off my climate and healthcare section with a quick poll as well. So our poll question is, how many hours per day are women collectively spending on water collection? It's looking pretty spread out here. All right, it looks like most people have their votes in. So it's actually, the answer is 200 million hours are spent collecting water. And so that's a staggering statistic that I found during my research. And through my research, I've also found that women are huge drivers of change, especially in the climate space. And these 200 million hours could be better spent in numerous other ways, like education, as Emma discussed. And that could trickle down to improving the lives of women and girls and thus their communities after that. So one of the most important lessons I learned was that climate change is not gender neutral. Women are impacted more by climate than men. And through my research, I found the impacts are primarily broken into 4 categories, which are access to food and water, land rights, climate change, and the impact on health. So I delved into each of these. So in terms of access to food and water, as our poll discussed, women are responsible for gathering the clean water and taking care of agricultural land for more than 3/4 of households. And so this is a really taxing duty as they have to go super far to gather the water. It's often quite dangerous and they go up to 3 times a day. And even with these trips, it's often not enough water. And a lot of this lack of access to water is due to the climate changes, including increasing drought conditions and corporations runoff from non-sustainably run business practices. So this takes away women from their time that they could spend towards education or towards learning a different skill, and is a huge barrier to their access to it. And then on top of that, their access to land, women actually predominate the world's food production up to 50 to 80%, but they own less than 10% of the land. And so this lack of ownership inherently gives control of the energy use of the land and the decisions for the land to the men, which they are not really the predominant users of. So putting ownership in the hands of women here could be very powerful in terms of getting renewable energy in and other land decisions. So tying this back to climate change, we've seen already how changing climate conditions are worse for women than men through food and water and land. And one of the most known facts that I've seen through my research is the natural disaster fact, that more women are impacted by climate conditions and natural disasters as a result, and that connects back to their health and the health of their families. So the World Health Organization estimated that 4.3 million people die each year from health complications caused by cooking and solid fuels, and about 3 million people cook and heat their homes with biomass and coal that create these illnesses. And a lot of that is a byproduct of climate change and the policies around climate change. So we can see there's a real issue in how women are being impacted and thus trickling down to how their families are impacted and how their whole community is impacted after that. So the inclusion of women in the decision-making process is the leading solution, as predominantly male-run boards can perpetuate climate change and governance policy that is almost ignorant to the issues that women are facing. So from that, what would it look like if women were on the boards, if women were involved? So women are more likely to perceive global issues such as pollution and conflict and inequality as more serious as their male counterparts, and they're more likely to choose products that are sustainable for society. And they're also, in terms of financial advisors, 42% more likely than men to be interested in ESG policies. So all of this combined can lead to real change in the ESG space, especially in climate. It also showed that having women in charge of disaster management can have an important impact into disaster reduction in the future. So again, what if women did not need to spend time on gathering water on a daily basis? What does that mean for our economy? And hopefully we can discuss that question later in our talk. So with that being said, I'd now like to turn it over to the healthcare aspect of this intersectionality. So I'm going to start out with just a quick fact that for every $1 invested in water and sanitation, there's a 4.3 to 1 ratio of savings in the form of reduced healthcare costs globally. So that's even going beyond climate cause issues. Women also have different health needs and have different expression of illnesses than men. So they would require a different type of care. And oftentimes the research done for healthcare and medicine is done on male populations. And so the care that women receive is not usually sufficient. In addition to that, roughly 80% of healthcare decisions in a household are made by women. And so they're also the ones that are taking care of their family members. So that would, you would think, translate into more investment into women and their funding, but they actually only receive 4% of overall funding of the healthcare research and development. And they also pay more for their health insurance because of all their visits. So they're putting in they're most of the consumer of healthcare, but they're not getting the best rewards out of it. Another big concern in women care is maternal care and family planning. And one of the biggest aha moments in my research personally was finding out that the US had the highest maternal mortality rate in developed nations. And it was primarily due to lack of capital and access to midwives or postpartum care and just research in general around maternal care. And maternal and newborn mortality leads to a $15 billion loss in potential productivity globally every year. So there's an opportunity there for capital to be adjusted. And again, one of the many solutions I mentioned before was that we want personalization of care, and that has been shown to be brought in through telemedicine. And in support of that, women are actually 75 to 85% more likely to use telehealth. So that could lead to a growth in maybe the femtech industry and other research areas, such as fertility care, which is now a $41 billion industry. So with all of that being said, I'd really like to know how we can do more and what we can leverage to bring money into research, allocate capital into women, and bring them into higher positions to bring about this change that we're looking for. So with that being said, I'm going to pass it over to Megan to discuss economic opportunity.
Great, thanks so much, Saumya. So as Saumya stated, I'm gonna touch on some of the highlights of my research on the intersection of economic opportunity and gender. As Emma and Saumya both said in their parts, increased female access to things like education and maternal care, and even increasing ownership of resources for women like land can have profound effects on the way in which women are able to contribute to local economies. However, the potential doesn't have to stop at local economies. And in both developing and developed nations, equipping women with more economic resources can have both microeconomic and macroeconomic boosts. So before I delve a little bit more into my research, we're going to do one more poll. The question this time is, how many women globally do you think face legal restrictions from having the same choice of work as men? So I'll give everyone just a couple of seconds to answer that. Seeing lots of like changing answers here. This is interesting. All right, awesome. So it looks like there is a pretty equal split between 1.8 billion, 2.2 billion, and 2.7 billion. The correct answer is in fact 2.7 billion women. That is a huge number of women who face legal barriers to finding work. These barriers exist in all regions of the world. And in 18 countries, husbands have the legal right to prevent their wives from working. Additionally, in 59 countries, there are no workplace protection laws in place against sexual harassment, which further adds to the barriers that women worldwide face when trying to find decent work to support their families. Unlocking women's talent and drive by putting them to work in paying jobs is key to achieving the sustainable development goals that you see on the slide here that are directly related to economic opportunity. So in any introductory economics class, you learn that there are 3 precursors to economic growth. There's more capital, more labor, and better use of existing capital and labor. Women can help grow all 3 of these things. They can help generate capital through their work. They can increase the size of the labor force, just as a mere fact of being 50% of the population. And they can increase efficiency in the labor force in some industries, like Saumya presented. This is why women are undoubtedly change makers with increased economic opportunity. They uphold the basic tenets of economics that help nations grow and thrive. And by tapping into this economic opportunity for more than 2.7 billion women worldwide, we can create long-lasting change. So since economic opportunity is such a wide-ranging topic, I started by looking at the highest of macro levels by looking at things like GDP growth, income per capita, and national competitiveness. Unsurprisingly, gender equality is associated with better outcomes on all 3 of these fronts. As I dug deeper into why gender equality is associated with better outcomes on these data points, I found correlations between these outcomes and entrepreneurship, access to job opportunity, and access to financial services such as bank loans. When we invest in women and girls having better access to these 3 things, the economic picture for both developed and developing nations brightens by an even higher order of magnitude. So to give you a really tangible example, let's go back to bank loans. Globally, in 2018, women received 40% of all bank loans. However, these loans are on average less than what men with comparable businesses receive. In the US specifically, the average loan size for a female-owned business is 31% lower than a comparable loan for a male. Academic research has shown that women are better at bootstrapping, they're better at saving money before taking out a loan, and they're better at paying back loans on time. So actually, giving women more financial responsibility not only uplifts women in our communities, but it also results in better returns on fixed income instruments derived from these loans and better balance sheets for the banks actually issuing these loans, since they're more likely to get paid back. So this is one really specific way that economic empowerment for women can make women be change makers. In developed countries, such as Canada and Japan, we know that closing the gender gap can boost GDP by about 4%. All things considered. In developing countries such as Pakistan or Niger, this number is 30 to 32%. Closing the gender gap can in fact help with the 4 sustainable development goals you see here on this slide, and capital investment via the public, private, and social sector can help speed up this evolution. So you see here on the virtuous circle for economic opportunity that employment and economic access ensures that women are better able to provide for their families and for their local economies. This leads to economic growth because nations' labor forces and productivity increases. And then this in turn helps decrease poverty and hunger altogether, because when nations grow, there has shown to be faster hunger and poverty alleviation. And a great example of this is what's happened in China over the last 2 decades. So to wrap it all up, I just want to pose this broad question to all of you. What if we were able to give women globally equal access to employment, entrepreneurship, and financial services? I think it would be amazing. We would achieve stronger financial results, and we would achieve these 4 sustainable development goals with stronger economies. So now that you've heard from all of us about these 4 dimensions where we believe that women can be change makers, we were kind of hoping to conclude by each highlighting a financial or a nonprofit opportunity that we see in our dimensions. So I'll turn it over to Emma first. And once we go through that, would love to open this up for discussion. So Emma, over to you.
Thank you. Oh, hopefully I'm unmuted and you can hear me. So I found a couple of really incredible nonprofits that specifically focus on increasing girls' education. So really, again, focusing on the aspect of girls being educated and how that interacts within the virtuous cycle. So a couple of them are She's the First, CamFed, and Educate Girls. And all of these work in various regions to increase access to education, training and mentorship for girls, and provide funding locally that allows these communities and economies to really focus on educating our girls. And so when thinking about, what can WoWE do, one potential is really looking at incredible nonprofits like this and thinking about how we can, increase funding for these types of organizations. Now I will pass it to Saumya.
Thanks, Emma. So for climate, I was thinking more about where the intersection of women and climate were, and I found a great organization called We Can, which is the Women Environment Climate Action Network, and they seem to have a great combination of empowering women to change the environment, as well as different impacts in the environment that affect women greater. So that was a great nonprofit I found there. For healthcare, I found, since one of the greatest issues was having women on the board, a great investment opportunity would be to invest in femtech, where women are in all C-suite positions and their products are to help women. And so some of the ones that I found that are doing very well right now are Flow Health and Womb and Kind Body, which are all towards maternal and newborn or fertility inventions and data science driven solutions. So I'll pass it over to Megan for her economic opportunity.
Great, thanks, Saumya. So in thinking about the virtuous circle of economic opportunity, I really felt that microloans were something that helped touch upon each one of those different circles and sustainable development goals. In particular, an organization I've been following for some time now is Kiva, where they are built on the premise of microloans as economic opportunity and not charity. And so with Kiva, you as a person who wants to make a loan would make a small loan. It could be, I think, as little as $25. And it would go to someone in a developing nation for them to work on their entrepreneurial venture or their small business with, and then you would actually get repaid. And the amazing thing about Kiva is that they have a really high repayment rate. It's like over 95%. And I think for me, this really just highlights that when we give people economic opportunity via direct cash or via a direct loan, it doesn't always have to be charity. It can be a financial investment that actually gives us a really great return and is kind of a win-win for both. So with that, I hope that some of what you've heard today has been interesting and inspiring. And seeing as all of us on here are change makers in some way, we would love to kind of open this up for discussion and hear what opportunities you're excited about or what from the research you might want to kind of discuss further. So I'll leave it at that and see if anyone is brave enough to come off mute and get us started.